some guy talk about snakes. It restores my faith in humanity a little bit. Okay. Okay, well, as he said, my name is Joe Cavataio. I am an amateur herpetologist, amateur historian. My primary interests lie sort of in the crossroads of herpetology and history or cultural history. So this is sort of like right up my alley. This is a topic I've researched for a really long time. I've traveled around this country in pursuit of reptiles and amphibians and abroad. But something about the regional herpetology is really close to my heart. And so that's what I'm mostly interested in, even though I've been to rainforests and deserts. I always come back to this because this is just extra fascinating to me, and I hope it is for you guys too. So this introductory page right here is a picture of one of the last Massasaugas ever caught in Lake County at Ryerson. So that's just that's the only photo I have because there aren't too many of them in existence. Okay. Why isn't this going down? Sorry, my arrows are not working right now. Talk amongst yourselves. Yeah, I don't know. Like this, I don't think that. Maybe to do that.
Maybe go back to.
Let's see.
See, now they're now online, they're going to be seeing.
That's fine.
That's okay.
Yeah, that's fine. Okay. So a little bit of basics on the Massasauga. I'm sure a lot of you guys have some familiarity with the species. Scientific name is Cistrurus catenatus. It was described by the multi-talented Rafinesque in 1818. The Massasauga is one of 3 species in the genus Cistrurus. There's actually a western species as well that occurs largely west of the Mississippi River. And there are several subspecies of the pygmy rattlesnake, which is even smaller snake. It's one of the 4 venomous snakes found in Illinois and the only venomous snake native to the northeastern part of the state. Do any of you guys know what the other 3 venomous snakes in Illinois are? This is a good quiz. Copperhead, cottonmouth. Yeah, timber rat. Yeah, there you go. But yeah, okay. So those are the 3. The Massasauga was once abundant throughout most of Illinois, the northern 2/3 of the state. Pretty much anywhere where their habitat would have been wet prairie, pothole prairies, and things like that. Unfortunately, they are now down to a single occurrence in Clinton County, which is the southern portion of their historical range in Illinois. In 1994, they were designated as state endangered. Took long enough. In 2016, they received federal protection. All right. The Eastern Massasauga is a very small snake, less than 3 feet, but often 2 to 3 feet. They are found, like I said, in wet prairies, typically with adjacent upland habitat. Typically, the Massasauga will spend its winters in the wetlands, and then as the spring transitions into summertime, they'll move upland. And they'll return back. Yes, yes.
Says this is going out for them, but it's not going out to the Zoom.
Okay.
So we're just gonna fix something here.
Okay, sure. Yep, please.
So where's Clinton County exactly?
If it happens again, do that. Just go to display settings and duplicate. Okay. Okay, cool. Clinton County would be like north of the Shawnee. Yeah, so they're absent in the Shawnee because of the topography and the habitat. But that's where you start getting to the timber rattlesnake territory down there. On the topic of wetlands, the Eastern Massasauga is almost completely dependent upon burrowing crayfish. Burrowing crayfish are sort of like they're burrows. These are not the types of crayfish that you'd find in the water. Typically, they live in the water, but they live underneath the water table in prairies. Their burrows go down 6, 7, 8 feet, and they have multiple chambers inside of their burrows. This provides sometimes the only hibernaculum or hibernation space for these Massasaugas. Typically, when that water table starts to drop, the crayfish are the first ones to go, and then after that, the Massasaugas, the habitat becomes unlivable for them. Their diet consists primarily of rodents, amphibians, and snakes. If you think about it, there's nothing much easier to eat than a smaller snake if you're a larger snake. And they are predated by a multitude of species, hawks, all kinds of birds of prey, raccoons, skunks, opossums. One of the researchers down at the Clinton County populations, he states that the wild turkeys put a pretty good dent in the numbers because they have no fear of Massasaugas. They just pick them off like crazy. So they are largely sedate and they're inoffensive toward humans. I've walked by them many times and they just sit there, and it even takes a lot for them to even rattle. So they would rather reserve their energy. There's been a lot of misinformation about the aggression of the species. It's completely unfounded. And also I have to add that these are viviparous snakes. So these, like all rattlesnakes and most pit vipers, these are live bearing. They do not lay eggs like most snakes do. Just an interesting fact. Okay, so we're gonna get into a little bit of the history. The word Massasauga is Chippewa for great river mouth. However, the local Potawatomis in this region called it Natowisawak, which means little rattlesnake. You guys, I'm sure, are all familiar who Robert Kennicott is, or mostly familiar with him. Robert Kennicott was a naturalist in the 19th century, a local. His father founded the Grove in Glenview. Robert Kennicott was a huge fan of the Massasauga and really performed many of the initial studies on them. It was he who discovered that snake venom is only toxic, or it can only hurt you if it's injected into your bloodstream. He would actually milk the venom from Massasaugas into a silver spoon and make cats and snakes and other animals and birds drink it. And he realized that it was not toxic at all when the snakes drank it, but in fact only when it was injected in through the skin. One of my favorite quotes from Kennicott was, "Were it not for the foolish prejudices, we might see much to admire in the rattlesnake." The Massasauga was mostly gone from this Chicago region by the early 20th century due to habitat destruction and direct persecution. That really applies to the state of Illinois in general. In the 19th century, the habitat was swiftly destroyed by agriculture primarily, and then as a secondary cause was direct persecution by a lot of farmers and landowners at the time who just wanted nothing to do with them. And the Massasauga, in a way, represented like the untamed wilderness they were trying to sort of overcome. So they did not like Massasaugas or wolves or bears and all the other things that are gone from Illinois. So, and by the middle of this century, only a handful of documented occurrences remained. So the last documented Massasauga in DuPage County was around 1940. In Will County, it was 1999. It was a road-killed animal. And the final holdouts located in the region were very close to where we're sitting right now, in northern Cook County, southern Lake County, within the vicinity of the Des Plaines River. And that's sort of like the topic of tonight. I'm going to talk a lot about that population. So I'm going to refer to it as the Lake Cook County population. They occurred up to about the 1930s from roughly Half Day Road south of the junction of Milwaukee Avenue, North River Road, where like River Trail Nature Center is. But the ground zero would have been centered around the Wheeling area, particularly east of the Des Plaines River. There were a few scattered records on the west side of the river, but by the 1930s, a lot of that was sort of urbanized. Wheeling had been quite built up around there, so they were kind of pushed out. But east of the river, there were a lot of undeveloped land. A lot of it was owned by the Forest Preserve of Cook County and Lake County, but there were also a lot of small farms and a lot of livestock grazing areas that were had not been tilled or anything like that. So there was a lot of wetland that was not really appropriate for farming at that time. So these are really bad. This is a really bad map here, but basically on the left side is a 1939 aerial, and you can kind of make out that main road, actually 294 is not even there yet. But you can see that's Potawatomi Woods, and you can see where River Woods is up over there. Obviously between 1938 and this is, I think, 2019 or 2020 Google map. A lot of development has occurred, but you can sort of see a lot of the at the time it was mostly savanna. Now since then it's been allowed to become more dense woodland, but there was a lot of savanna and prairie along that eastern side of the Mississippi. Oh my gosh, the Des Plaines River, and that's where the bulk of the Massasaugas were found at that time. So in 1931, several members of the local Isaac Walton League were walking through the forest preserve locally, and they were picking blackberries, as a lot of people did in those days, as a form of recreation. And they came across 3 Massasaugas, and they killed 2 of them, and they collected the 3rd one for proof that they had actually found a rattlesnake in the forest reserve. When it was brought to light, a media frenzy occurred, and Massasaugas were then guilty of creating a serious depression in the berry picking and home canning industry. Now, this is sort of like the jump off event that started every other media sensationalized event, and ironically through the Isaac Walton League. Back then, and you guys will see that there's a lot of official forest reserve people and all that kind of stuff. The attitude was very different back then than it is now. So it wasn't unheard of for a lot of people to want to rid the forest reserves of Massasaugas. In 1933, just a couple years later, Commissioner Homer Bird, he was a Cook County commissioner, he requested a bounty for every dead rattlesnake collected. The request was denied by the finance department. If you ask me, I think they were worried about running out of money, because the people of Wheeling were worried about their reputation. They wanted people to come through their town. They didn't want people to be afraid, but with all the media attention that the town was receiving because of the Massasaugas and the newspaper articles and all this, there was a lot of contention. It's funny because at the time, Bird, he wanted hogs released, knowing that hogs sort of, they'll eat anything, you know, they're not really picky about what they eat. And he assumed that if you just release a bunch of hogs in the forest reserve, it would eat up all the Massasaugas. He even went as far as recommending that Texas king snakes be captured in Texas, shipped up here, and released, not knowing that Texas king snakes would not survive our winters. Of course, that would never happen, but it was just kind of funny that not all that long ago, these are things that officials were looking into doing. This is a photo of, you can see the county commissioner Bird on the right with George Olses, who is the Cook County Forest Preserve official at the time, holding or sort of dangling 2 dead Massasauga rattlesnakes that were captured around that time, 1933. They loved to pose with snakes back in these days. You'll see a lot of that. In 1953, the Lake County Conservation Superintendent Roberts Mann, and some of you guys may know that name, he wanted to assure all the visitors of the forest reserves that all the Massasaugas were being destroyed where they were found, and he assured them they would ultimately disappear. He was working hand in hand with a lot of citizens as well as county employees to seek out and destroy as many of them as they could possibly find. Which takes me to the Wheeling rattlesnake hunt. The Wheeling rattlesnake hunt is probably one of the most epic herpetological historical events that's ever happened in the Chicago area. Basically, you had a group of people that were not happy with the progress that was occurring or lack of ridding the forest reserves of rattlesnakes. So they took it upon themselves to form their own group. So back in 1954, you had a longtime Wheeling resident and barber, Edward Belmore. He organized the first of almost 20 annual Wheeling rattlesnake hunts with the help of his friend Arnold Krause, who was a Wheeling police officer. The idea was that he would use the newspapers and the media as a way to attract people to come in to actually help and destroy all the rattlesnakes. In these hunts, the snakes were typically captured and killed, although occasionally they were donated to various institutions, universities. At the time, the curator of the River Trail Nature Center would want them, he would take them and then secretly release them back in the forest reserves. Yes. Again, some snakes were donated to the Lincoln Park Zoo, Brookfield Zoo, and of course, various museums, live and dead. And the roundups attracted dozens of participants, or hundreds, some as far away as New York. People really wanted to get on the action. They felt a certain camaraderie in these events. So here's a photo of, I think it was 1962, if I'm not mistaken. It was definitely the early 60s. And this is just one of the rattlesnake roundups. You could see Ed Belmore in this, wearing the white hat and the white shirt. And to his left with the arms crossed, the kind of the flannel shirt, that's Krause, Officer Krause. And it's interesting to see that as recently as 1960s, they allowed children to go into the Forest Service to catch rattlesnakes. You can see there's a little boy in the front and the right, as well as a few high school age kids in the middle there. As you can imagine, a group like this could do quite a number to rattlesnakes in the Forest Reserve. And this is a photo from that same hunt as it was progressing. At the time, there was some soybean fields over here, and you can see the snake hunters were actually seeking out the snakes with snake hooks or modified snake hooks that were usually like a hoe or a golf club that had been kind of turned into a snake hook, and that's what they would use to sort of manipulate the snakes when they found them. So in this particular hunt, there were 14 rattlesnakes caught, which is significant for a small, relatively small area. And this is yet another photo. I think this is the same date, and you can see these are just 7 of the 14 rattlesnakes, so half of them. Judging by the limpness, I would imagine most of these are probably already dead, although it says they were alive. My experience with snakes is when you hold them by the head, they thrash about. They hate that. So I think those are probably dead rattlesnakes.
How old would you think they were? Can you tell by the size?
The rattlesnakes, they're adult. In this photo, these are all adults. So that's like the typical adult size snake. So, it could be anywhere from, 4 to 10 years old or so. Yeah. So, Belmore and Krause's activities sort of inspired other people to do the same. This was Richard Davis of Wheeling. He actually had a dog training facility nearby, and his was west of the Des Plaines River. He voiced concerns about the rattlesnakes biting his dogs, and so he took it upon himself to eradicate as many as he can find. You can see in this second photo on the right, he caught 3 of them and put them in a tank, like a trough for a photograph. But he was pretty well known for killing them as well. And again, this was just the attitude of the time. This was, I'm not demonizing anybody, but people were just looking out for their own best interest before they really knew about the importance of biodiversity. So in 1969, Ed Belmore passed away, and that year there was no snake hunt. However, his friend Arnold Krause assumed the role of the organizer in 1970 and 1971. However, 0 Massasaugas were caught in those 2 years. That was really, it ended not because he wanted to end. I think he was a little bit frustrated they weren't getting as much. But if you think about what's going around in the early 70s, was the environmental movement. You had Silent Spring, and you had the EPA, and you had Clean Air Act and Clean Water Act. And I think a lot of those things were sort of, there was a heavy emphasis on maybe not doing these things while there's still some around. This is interesting. 2 interesting maps from Charles Bushy, who did a 1975. Actually, he published his findings in 1978. Charles Bushy was a herpetologist, and he studied the Lake County Massasaugas. If you see on the left side, you can kind of see Deerfield Road. You can see Lake Cook Road down over there. So you get a general idea. There's Port Wine Road, goes up and down. The difference between 1939 is you'll see that the dark areas are the moist depressions, and that kind of the lighter grid is the range of the Massasauga itself. You fast forward, to 1975, and you can see a drastic reduction in habitat in wetland areas, as well as an increase. 294 start quite a bit of their habitat, but it's kind of sad to see this. You can see where basically Port Wine Road cut right through the heart of their range over there, and they would be often found dead on that road as they were trying to cross the road. In that same paper, Charles Bushy said he believed that the future survival of the remaining populations of the eastern Massasauga does not appear likely. population will meet increasingly with construction within the study area, reducing habitat, and with an increasing human population, which is generally hostile toward the snakes. Well, he was very right about that. So as you move forward in time, the onslaught continued. In the 1980s, there was increased habitat destruction. The Riverwoods community, which was actually developed earlier in the century, was expanding and becoming improving. Salceda North subdivision. I can do a whole presentation on the Salceda North subdivision on its own. There's a lot of drama there, but it located at Lake Cook Road in Sanders. That was one of the last really good pockets of Massasaugas. When they developed the Salceda North subdivision, the residents were horrified to find Massasaugas in their window wells, on their front porch, in their backyard. You had residents calling the police every day because they were reporting rattlesnake eggs, which are actually just rabbit droppings. So they were paranoid. They were very scared. And then by the time the Villas North subdivision was built, which is just south of Salceda North, that sort of pushed all the remaining snakes to one small available lot. And once that lot was going to be developed, members of the Chicago Herpetological Society came and took all those animals because Northbrook did not want them introduced into their Cook County part of the forest reserves. So members of the Chicago Herp Society took it upon themselves to collect them all and release them at Ryerson. Ryerson was a little bit more progressive back in this day. Cook County wanted nothing to do with them. Ryerson or Cook County or Lake County is like, sure, drop them on our forest reserve, we'll take them. And of course, yes, road building and road widening was a huge issue for the Massasaugas. And all of this development, of course, leads to the lowering of the water table, which, like as I mentioned, will drive off the crayfish, which the rattlesnakes are dependent upon. So the 1990s, there were still some areas in the 1990s where you can still see the Massasaugas, although they're really dropping, right? They're really, really down to the wire now. Again, in 1994, they were listed as endangered. Took long enough. The last sighting of a Lake County Massasauga was in 1994, and that was my friend Tom, who was researching them and who wrote a lot of the papers at the time, found that one, and he never found one again. It was a female that he believed to be gravid. So in his mind, hey, this will have babies and we should see another spike, but it was either predated or got hit by a car or something, but it never, as far as we know, that was the last one. It was a long time ago. And then Willow Road, we always refer to as the Willow Sanders population. It was by far the last vestige of Massasaugas in this area. There was a plan by the county to construct a concrete wall that would keep those Massasaugas from crossing Willow Road. That was scrapped due to lack of funding. So you can see the priorities were definitely not favoring the Massasaugas. In the 2000s, in 2005, there was an SSP. It was implemented in hopes of saving the last of the Massasaugas in Illinois in general. This is the Cook County, Lake County. This is Central Illinois and Southern Illinois. And the DNR and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service established the Eastern Massasauga Rattlesnake Recovery Team. They were tasked with looking for all the rest of the snakes and just trying to get a feel for how many are left. And they found a total of 10 snakes in an area the size of a tennis court. So this was basically all the habitat, the appropriate habitat left was one small wet area at that Willow Sanders location, the size of a tennis court with 10 snakes. They panicked, and in an act of desperation in 2008, they decided let's just collect every single Massasauga we can, and we'll start up a captive propagation attempt. And that way they would just raise them in captivity, get numbers robust enough that at some point you can release them back into the wild. A total of 2 snakes were found, 1 male and 1 female. That was it. To add a little bit of drama to that, the female ended up giving birth shortly afterwards. And when DNA testing was carried out, the male was not the father. So a little bit of Jerry Springer there. So basically, there was another male at some point. No one ever found it. Maybe it could have been predated. It could have just, who knows, could have been collected by somebody. So that's not good news. When you're down to 2 snakes and the young of one female, it's not a really good population to start a breeding program with. This is a photo of one of the very last of the Cook County Massasaugas from that Willow Sanders site, taken from my friend Tom Anton, who was the biologist that was responsible for carrying out all the studies toward the end of their existence in the area. And this is a photo of one of the Lincoln Park Zoo's biologists. So those two snakes that were caught, again, they captured them. They weren't exactly sure what to do with them, but they knew if they released them, you might as well just give up. So they tried to reproduce them, and they did had some success with them. But again, it's not a very promising sign when you've only got a handful of animals to work with. So what does the future hold for the eastern Massasauga in the Chicago area? Well, like I said, there's been mixed results with captive propagation. Genetic diversity is very low. So anytime you only have 1 or 2 animals or 3 animals to start with, you're concerned about genetic abnormalities, things like that. Snake fungal disease, which at the time, and kind of still is an emerging pathogen. Snake fungal disease, it's not completely understood, but it has ravaged snake populations across the country and beyond. It's also the reason why you can't just take Massasaugas from somewhere else in the state and bring them over here, because you always have to keep in mind that in the area where these Massasaugas were found, there are other snakes. You know, there are smooth green snakes and there are milk snakes and other species that are species of special concern in Illinois. And you really don't want to be bringing something in that shouldn't be there if it has not been any snake fungal disease in the area. It's very, very easily spread from snake to snake. Of course, poor public perception. I don't have to say that. I mean, you guys know that snakes have a really bad reputation. If you lived in the area around Northbrook or Wheeling or Ryerson, the last thing you want is the officials telling you, hey, we're putting rattlesnakes in your backyard, right? People just don't like that. You guys might not mind that. You guys are okay. But like the average people do not like rattlesnakes released near them. So there's a lot of politics behind that. So obviously that was a wall. And of course, they don't have the same kind of habitat they used to a long time ago. You know, this isn't the 1930s where they had acres and acres and acres. We're down to like small patches of habitat, which is one of the drivers for their extinction anyway. So from all angles, it doesn't really make a whole lot of sense to reproduce, to propagate them in captivity and release them. It's just not really, you know, there's better ways of managing it. Of course, there's also the continued threat of poaching. This was a problem back in the 60s and 70s when people knew that there were Massasaugas there. There were people and they were not protected. You can legally go to the Forest Reserve and collect Massasaugas for yourself, for a pet, or if you just didn't like them, you can go there and kill them all you want. So that would definitely be, and you can't do this under the radar, right? So if the county wanted to release Massasaugas back in the Forest Reserve, you have to have aspects of the issue that really, a lot of us just do not believe that these will ever be released and back into the area. Again, designated federally threatened to 2016. The final holdout for the species is in Clinton County. Very precious view. This photo is one that I took in Clinton County of a beautiful Massasauga, and you can see how well they camouflage. If you're walking around, you probably wouldn't see it if you're not looking for it, and it probably would not even bite you because they're very, very docile. So this is a photo of a couple of young researchers down at the Clinton County. They're doing studies. They're injecting a pit tag or a passive integrative transponder into the snake to study their movements. The Eastern Massasauga is absolutely on the verge of extinction in the state, good or bad, depending on how you see it. People often ask me, why is it a bad thing if the Eastern Massasauga goes extinct? For me, it's a loss of our natural heritage. It's a loss of a huge part of what made the Chicago region what it is. And I think that, our actions against the Massasauga should serve as a warning because this could easily happen to another species. Maybe someday will be something that's, not a snake, it might be something, a mammal or a bird, So I think we should absolutely learn from our actions and ensure that this kind of thing never happens again. And to close, I want to include this really cool quote from Robert Kennicott, who said, before waging war upon any animal, let us study its habits and look well to the consequences which would follow its extermination. Thank you. And yeah, I will definitely take questions.
breeding with the western rattlesnakes?
No, because that would be a hybrid. So that would be like, it would be like, yeah. I mean, it's not that important. I mean, it is important, but if we would want pure Eastern Massasaugas because that's generationally they're sort of adapted to live in our region, versus the Westerns are more of a desert to lowland sort of dry species.
When they ask a question, just repeat it, and the people are helping you.
Got it. Okay, sure. Yeah. Yeah.
Were there any populations in southwestern Cook County, like in the Taylor Woods area, because it's one of the largest, like, wild areas? Like, I'm kind of surprised that, like, the last areas were in New England and Northbrook, were not in Taylor Street, so big.
So yeah, so what he's asking is, why wouldn't they have been, or would they have ever been at the Palos or any other large natural area? That's a good question. A lot of people ask me like, well, how do you know they're all gone? I knew somebody who knew somebody who saw one a couple of years ago. And the truth is, and unless a site is completely paved over, there's always hope, right? However, there have not been any, there have been no documented occurrences since then, 2009, which is when they were all collected. As far as the Palos area goes, there's absolutely a chance that they could exist there. A lot of it is wooded, but there are some prairie areas which do support rare snakes, like the Graham's crayfish snake, which is found there. Kirtland snakes are found there. My guess is based on how much surveying has occurred down there over the years. By now you would have found them, because Palos is a pretty large area, but it's not that big. Like, it's not like unreasonable to deduce that they're all gone. I in my eyes, I mean, I think that they were probably there up until about the late 19th century, but I put money on that they were gone. They're not there anymore. The last ones before this were definitely down in like the Crete area in Will County. And that the one I alluded to that was hit by a car in 1999, that was a very, very small population that was discovered on accident in a golf course. And that one kind of went really quick. From the time they discovered it to the time it went extinct, it was like a matter of a decade. So yes, they could certainly be around. Lake County has a lot of potential. There's a lot of wetlands in Lake County, a lot of privately owned land in Lake County. I'm not sure if a private landowner had them, he or she would tell anybody about it, because then they're under scrutiny by the government, because these are a federally protected species, unless they truly cared about the Massasaugas, which a lot of people don't. So I'm not writing it off completely, but based on what I've learned from people that work directly with the species and who've done survey after survey after survey, I'm comfortable knowing that they're extirpated from the region.
What about in the area, in the far northwest part of the state? Like
Galena?
Mississippi River, corridor up there, because there's a lot of wetlands and because I think there's population still in Wisconsin too.
Yep. Yeah, Wisconsin. The best populations are in Michigan, lower Michigan. In fact, that's the only state they're not really protected in. So they're either endangered or threatened in every state they occur in, which is like 6 states. The timber rattlesnake still occurs in that unglaciated region, and they're like Galena and all that. They're not really common, but they're found there. As far as I'm aware, I don't know if any Massasauga has ever been found over there. Possible, but I'm just not aware of it. Yes.
About Indiana, northern Indiana.
So there's a small population in the dunes of Massasaugas in northern Indiana. They were last studied like early 2000s. I don't think there's a whole lot going on with them that I'm aware of, but it's also a very sensitive kind of subject. So I think the Indiana DNRs, if they're doing any work with it, they're going to keep it under wraps. It's not something they want a lot of people aware of. Again, the threat of poaching is really strong with these. For some reason, a lot of people I'm sorry.
Even though it's federally protected.
Yeah, there's no honor among these people. They're collect people who poach. They don't really, none of that stuff really matters to them. As long as they have a really sneaky way of doing it, they'll do it. And as far as I'm concerned, it's not a good enough reason to own a Massasauga rattlesnake is not like on the top of my list, but there are people who really find joy in this stuff. Or they collect it and they ship it. One of the things, again, there's a lot of nuance to this whole story with the Massasaugas. Back in the 1960s, I'm not going to mention names. There was a very prominent zookeeper in the Chicago area that would capture them. He was actually sworn to protect the Massasaugas in Cook and Lake counties. He would collect them and ship them to Russia. for Russian zoos. And in return, Russia would send him rare reptiles from Russia for the zoo. So, all these different things kind of had just a collective impact on their population. Yes. Yeah, so she asked if it'd be possible to collect Massasaugas from like northern Indiana, quarantine them, or determine if they are in fact positive for snake fungal disease, and then release them into the Chicago region. I think the problem with that is, again, they're not doing very well there either. And so you're just sort of making a problem worse by reducing that population with no confidence at all that they're going to do well in the Chicago region, because we already know that all these players that have resulted in their extinction or extirpation they're all still there. So there's really just a loss of habitat, poaching, degraded habitat. So that is a good question, because I've been asked that a number of times. I just don't think it's worth it, because and you're also talking about two different organizations. You talk about two different states. So ideally, if the Massasaugas are doing really good in southern Illinois, that might be where you want to take them, because you're not going across state lines and all the paperwork and red tape. But the truth is, they're doing very poorly down there. They're doing very. I mean, I think there's probably I would say 10 to 15 years they might just be gone. I mean, they're just they're inbred, and there's not a whole lot of genetic diversity down there, and their habitat patches are very small. And there's a lot of people down there that don't like the Massasaugas, because back about 20 years ago, the Massasaugas blocked a large casino from being built on there. So a lot of the locals are still really bitter about that. And if they see a Massasauga, they're like, well, this could have been tax money for us. And, so it's, yes.
In the species survival plan, do you have any idea how big of an area is needed to have a sustainable population, or, how much habitat, how much area would it take to have a sustainable population somewhere?
Yeah, I'm not sure if that's really known. Like if anyone's researched and thought, well, we need at least this much space, because it's a species that is just understudied in general. I can tell you though that what's available now in Cook and Lake counties is not sufficient. And you get a lot of people who recreate. You get a lot of hikers, you have bicyclists, they're always widening the paths and building paths. And now they went from crushed gravel to impermeable surfaces. All these different things are just, going against the well-being of Massasaugas if they were ever to reintroduce them. But to answer your question, the more the bigger the better. The more so in southern Illinois, these are small, like postage stamp sized lots. And frankly, I'm surprised they're even still there, because they're blocked by roads and buckthorn, autumn olive walls. They can't go past. There's all kinds of barriers to their well-being down there. So I really don't know if anybody really knows like the size. It's just, we're looking to find the biggest, like in Michigan, for example, there's a lot of habitat in Michigan. So they're doing rather well in Michigan.
I lived most of my life in the southeastern part of Michigan, and I don't recognize the animus toward them there that you're describing here. It's sort of surprising. People seem to have the attitude that they were really rather harmless and very small. And I was involved with youth scouting, and it was really, really downplayed as nothing to really worry about. And we hiked and camped in all those areas.
Yeah, I think it just speaks to the power of the media. All it takes is a few people to set up a media storm, and then they appeal to the fear of citizens. And in a large area like Chicago, where there's 10 million people in the Chicago metropolitan area, people are easily led. And I think there's certainly reason to be cautious if you were in an area with the Massasaugas. I mean, obviously you don't want to run around bare feet if you know you're going to be where the Massasaugas are, but there's also no reason to be terrified of it either. I think just what happened in the Chicago region in the middle of the century just spelled doom. It just, everybody just was scared. This is just a microcosm. I can go on. I mean, I've written chapters about this, and there's so many stories. It's really, people were acting very irrational at this time. And a lot of it was fed by the media, for sure.
A couple questions from the chat.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah.
want me to read them? Or
Yeah, could you, because this is kind of wonky.
Sure. So, you've answered some of this, but is there an active captive breeding program anywhere, in Illinois? Anywhere else?
In Illinois, yes and no. There was supposed to be. They intended on starting it. Ultimately, as far as I'm aware now, some of this stuff is kept under wraps. Like I'm not aware of, I'm not a lot of these things. But I know that some of the some of the offspring for the originally captured animals are now adults. And I know that as of recently, the Brookfield Zoo had one of them on display in their reptile house. I would wager that there is no more captive propagation of the Massasaugas. I just don't think it just wasn't feasible after a certain point.
So that sort of answers the second question. Are there any still alive in collections or descendants of the originals?
I believe so. Yeah, I believe there are. Yeah. As recently as the early 90s. So when I was a kid, I used to go to the Grove all the time in Glenview. And as recently as the early 90s, there were 2 Massasaugas on display. And like when you walk into that interpretive center, there's like now, if any of you guys have been to the Grove, there's like a squirrel. When you walk in there, it's like this crazy squirrel that runs around, and there's a cage below it. And that's where they always had the Massasaugas. So when I was like 11, 12 years old, I used to just go there and stare at them. And it was the coolest thing in the world that they were Massasaugas in the backyard of the Grove, basically. But those were definitely collected, and those I'm sure a lot of people saw those, but I think all that's left might be a handful of like aging offspring for the original 2 that were captured in 2009.
One more.
Sure.
As they shelter in crayfish holes, what do they do if they're wet prairie floods?
So okay, so in the wintertime, the crayfish sort of build these caverns. So it's not always just straight down. They build like straight down and they go to the side, and they build the little, and it's very dark and very cold and very wet. But Massasaugas over the millennia have adapted to this. So the idea is that in the wintertime or before winter sets in, they go down and they're often under the water until they reach a sort of air pocket under the underground. And it never really freezes there if you get down below the frost line. So even if it floods, there's small cavities that remain. And also when it gets really cold, their respiration shuts down. So they may only take a few breaths every minute. So they're not like using up all the oxygen. So I think that's how they've gotten by over the years. And then like I said, as the spring progresses into summer, they'll exit the wetlands and they will find the majority of their food, and they'll breed in more of uplands, either upland prairie or even into savannas or woodlands. In the case of the Ryerson, they'd be found in the woods sometimes, or like crossing roads of the woods. Port Wine Road was the site of a lot of roadkills, and that's all just kind of relatively dense woodland over there. But that's not where they live all the time. That's just where they were during the summertime. And then once fall came, they went right back down to the crayfish burrows. Sorry, she had her hand before. Yeah.
I was just wondering, like, how venomous was their bite?
Yeah, it's subjective. I mean, they are venomous. I would consider them to be dangerously venomous. So it's nothing that you just kind of like, oops, and hope it gets better. Definitely will require medical attention, antivenom. It's published right now. I just published a paper or a note really that describes a Massasauga fatality from Piatt County in 1853, where a 2-year-old was bitten and killed. I think that if you're very young or very old or have some sort of a suppressed immune system or something like that, then you're probably in more danger of serious effects of their venom. But like most people, if you were bitten, it hurts a lot. I've actually interviewed a few people that were bitten in the area, and they're doing well. In fact, one of them was bitten by a Massasauga when she was 17. And as a result, she became a nurse because I guess she kind of liked the experience of being in the hospital and like helping. She was actually trying to help the snake. She was riding her bike with her friends in Dam No. 1 Woods, saw a baby Massasauga, thought it was a garter snake, and she picked up to move it to the side of the road. Bless her heart, right? And then she got bitten by it, had to go to the hospital. But every picture of her in the hospital, she's smiling big, and now she's in her 70s. But she told me that she goes, the whole experience, I always cared about animals and I always cared about people. So to this day, she's still a nurse. Yeah, so that's always at least one good thing that came out of it. Yeah, in the back. I'll win back.
So, yes, part of my question, and then I was also gonna follow up, Are there any verified records in this eradication, or how many people actually got bit? I know it's way less populated, or can you relate to like, a place like Michigan, how often there are
There's,
actual encounters, even though it is pretty harmless overall?
yeah, so I know I can say that there have been no fatalities in the US since 1935. And that's largely because of, medical, medical and technology. We've developed antivenom. We're no longer rubbing gunpowder in our snake bites or trying to suck poison out. That's all outdated sort of. There has recently been a paper that looked at historical snake bites from 1800 until like, I think the 1980s or 90s, just in Massasauga, the states Massasaugas are native to. I can, if you're interested, leave me your information. I can get it for you. It's one of my associate of mine actually was one of the co-authors. It's really, really interesting. Now, a lot of the early bites of Massasaugas were not really like medically recorded. They were just like newspaper articles, like, oh, Farmer Bill was plowing the fields the other day and he was bitten by a sauger. So that's all we know. But most of them survived the bite, obviously. Even back then when there was no antivenom. Although it's interesting because although Illinois recorded about a third of the bites that like Michigan and Indiana combined did, the rate of the fatality rate was significantly higher. But again, this is all mostly during the 19th century. People would often just kind of brush it off, or they would just again, we didn't have antivenom. People would just use whatever to drink whiskey or whatever to cure the snake bite. And also because the snakes just don't really exist in most places they used to anymore. So you don't really have the interaction anymore. And you also have improvement in medical snake bite treatment. So all those things kind of together, you just don't really hear about Massasauga bites anymore. But I do have the information, not with me here, but I can get it if you're interested. Yes, sir.
First, thanks for your talk. It's been
Oh,
great.
thank you.
And maybe as close to the last question, I'd like to give you the chance to maybe say a bit more about yourself, because you announced at the beginning that you were an amateur herpetologist, but clearly you've built quite an impressive body of knowledge.
Oh, thank you.
And application of it. So just interested in how you got interested in this topic and how you built your body of knowledge over time, and how do you apply it besides coming to speak to folks like us?
Sure. Thank you for that. I mean, my earliest memory, I grew up on the northwest side of Chicago, Jefferson Park. It wasn't particularly a jungle, but I remember when I was about 6 years old, my dad had a tomato garden, and it was sort of like the tomatoes would grow along our fence. And I remember kind of looking at the tomatoes, and intertwined in the tomato plants was this really hefty, now I'm looking back, it was probably a pregnant female, a plains garter snake, which is one of the most common snakes in Chicago. And I was just absolutely just couldn't believe that there was a snake in the yard. I think about that moment often, even now as an adult, how that really kind of turned me on. I think it was, I think it was just an exotic animal that was my yard. You don't have to go. You don't have to go anywhere. In the Chicago region's got 50 species of reptiles and amphibians. People often believe that you got to go really far away to some exact place to find these things, but in our own backyard. But something about it, I don't know. I think a lot of young people, kids, and I used to do more kid stuff before I had my own kid, but like, kids naturally are drawn to these things, but people generally grow out of it as they mature, and I've clearly not matured. So something just never went away. So my interest in herpetology just grew as I got older, and I would keep reptiles. I'm not so much into that anymore. I went through my stage where I was keeping reptiles as pets, and I think there's a lot to learn about them. A lot we can learn about ourselves. And as far as the historical component, my grandpa was he was like a historian. He was not really, but he was just an old school guy. He'd drive me around the Chicago area where he grew up in Humboldt Park, and this is where we used to catch crayfish with a stick and all this. And I think these went hand in hand. I admired my grandfather, and so I just kind of looked at herpetology through the eyes of a historian. And so like this kind of stuff to me is like top notch. Like and there's so much drama. I mean, you can make like a documentary about this. I mean, I've definitely written more about this. This is sort of like a watered down distilled version, but there's a lot of really cool stories intertwined with the Massasaugas and people. And unfortunately, there's a sad ending in the Chicago region and in Illinois on the whole. But again, it's entertaining to learn about it and to read about it. But there's a lesson there. So I think that we can apply this to other things. And I think there was another part of your question I can't remember. I think that answered your question.
Yeah, what else do you do, besides?
Oh, okay, so,
the conferences,
yeah, so,
research?
so as far as independent research, yeah, I write a lot. I'm working on a book, but I've been doing that for a long time. It's hard to do that when you have family and kids. Like when you start doing this, you're like, oh, this will be done in a few years. Then you have kids and, takes a backseat to all that. I research a lot of herpetological history. I'm friends with like herp geeks and real herpetologists. We do a lot of survey work together, throughout the state and the Midwest. Basically any way I can, sort of, be exposed to these animals and learn something, and then also just, contribute to the body of knowledge. I try to do that. I just like, it's I have my family and my job, and then like, this is like it's all about reptiles and amphibians and history. I love it so much. So, my day job is a food scientist. It has nothing to do with this. That's a story, and that's a whole long story in its own. But even sometimes I'm at work, I just like, sneak and do some of this stuff, and I should be working, so. Sure, thank you. Yeah.
Just a quick story. I grew up in Libertyville. My dad worked for the North Shore Gas Company for his whole life. And in the 60s, I can remember my dad coming home and saying they were working along Riverwoods Road and they were laying gas lines.
Yeah.
And they would deposit the pipes along the side of the road in the afternoon and come back the next day. And they developed a snake hook.
Mhm.
So that, because the guys were afraid of snakes, and they would hook the end of the pipe and lift it up so any snake that was there could slither away and not bite them.
Yes, yeah, and there was I can't remember off the top of my head right now the road, but there was a road that it's not Lake Cook Road, it's in Lake County. It used to dead end. It didn't go over the Des Plaines River, but sometime in the 30s or 40s they extended the road over the river. And right now I can't think of exactly what the road is, but evidently in the process of building that road, they destroyed a hibernaculum, which is a known Massasauga hibernaculum that was there on the riverbank, which effectively like destroyed that entire sub-colony, because these animals sort of generationally they will go back to the same place to overwinter every year. And so there are probably hundreds of snakes that were destroyed at that time. So again, this is before, like nowadays, when you do a construction project, you have to consult with you have to have all these permits because there might be a threatened or endangered species here, but they didn't do any of this stuff back in the day. So it was almost like a perk, like, oh, if you're gonna do this, might as well just get rid of those rattlesnakes too. It was very common back then. I kind of wish we had that now, because then if we knew then what we know now, we would have been able to avoid doing these things. But yeah, a lot of times those construction workers would just have a modified hook or whatever it is to manipulate the snake, either dispatch them on site or at least to put them in a bucket and do away with it and donate to a zoo or college or whatever. But yeah, it was pretty common back then. But thanks for letting me know about that. That's really cool to know about that. Yeah. Yes.
Was there anything in Vernon Hills area or Indian Creek?
Yeah, I think they were pretty. I think the Massasaugas are pretty widely distributed throughout the Chicago region, but the region became developed so quickly that natural historians and biologists couldn't keep up. So by the time we were aware, like in the 1931 article where the Isaac Walton League discovered them, that was like one of the last vestiges, and it just so happened to be the perfect habitat. You had the river valley, you had the wetlands and the uplands, and it was again, the Wheeling area was like ground zero. You probably had a lot more of that. It's just that it was destroyed faster than people were even able to be aware there were the Massasaugas there. Yeah. Yes.
Sorry, so back to your interest,
Please.
So, there's a lot of like birders here. And we have like these like foreign people will go out and try to find a bird. So you said you hang out with like these reptile geeks.
Yep.
It's like trying to hey, there's this awesome snake here. We're gonna go try to find it.
Yeah, there's that crowd. Yeah, for sure. Like the life listers and stuff. Yeah, there's definitely a lot of that. I'm fine with that. I'm not. I personally I'm with a bunch of bird people. I don't want to make you guys mad. So my thought about life listing is it's sort of a self-serving activity. And I definitely keep a list of the species that I find, but it's not my number one priority. So I try to do something that's going to enhance and I know some bird people do this too. If it weren't for birders, there'd be a lot less habitat, right? I always say that support the bird people, because you guys are making sure these big wetlands are intact because people want to save the waterfowl, but there's also snakes and turtles and stuff that live there too. So yeah, there's definitely the camp that just like goes, like, let's get in the car, do a road trip real quick to this state and we're going to find this snake and we'll come back and rocket runs, whatever. Yeah, there's definitely a camp that does that as well. I do it occasionally. I mean, it's fun to do, little adventures. So yeah. Yes.
If by some weird chance on a bird walk, we happen to see a Massasauga, do you call someone? What do you do?
First, photograph it.
Okay.
Because nobody will believe you. If you say, I saw a Massasauga, they'll say, where'd you see that fox snake? Because fox snakes look, I should have had a photo for some of you guys who don't know what a fox snake looks like. They look very, very, very similar to a rattlesnake, to a Massasauga. They even rattle their tail like a Massasauga. Same exact pattern. They're just a little bit longer and skinnier. 10 times out of 10, when people say they found a Massasauga, it's a fox snake or sometimes a milk snake. But just to humor, I would say take a picture of it. The first thing you do is take a picture of it, remember where it was, and then you would probably contact the INHS or something like that just to report it. It'd be, and I'm not ruling out the existence of many more. They very well could be. It's just that they have not been seen with. There's people who do this for full time, just searching, and they have not been found. But yeah, absolutely. And even if it's a fox snake, take a picture. There's value in any kind of record. If you were to photograph like a fox snake or even a garter snake, and if you use like INAT or like I use Herp Mapper, which is it's sort of like a Merlin bird app, but for reptiles. So if you have Herp Mapper, you can take a picture of it, upload that record, and then all kinds of people use that information, INHS and DNR and all that stuff. So yeah. Yes.
Are snakes in the US still being exterminated? I mean, I'm just assuming that other rattlesnake in the West would probably still be on a hit list.
They're very common. So yeah, so the Western Massasauga rattlesnake, there's a lot more habitat out west in the plains. And these are not as finicky, I guess, not as much of a specialist, habitat specialist, more of a generalist. And there's a lot of like short grass prairie out west. They'll live on there's a lot of livestock grazing areas. They'll do fine in dry land, sort of like the dry version, the dry version of the Eastern Massasauga, but they're relatively common out there. You can drive out in some areas out there and at night and drive across, or not drive across, but run across like 6 or 7 of them at night crossing the road. Luckily, they're still pretty common. And same with the 3 pygmy rattlesnakes. They're pretty common. They're split up by where they occur. So some are Western, some are Florida, and some are just generally in the South. All fairly secure, relatively speaking. I think that all species of snakes are sort of in danger of being, at some point going endangered. But as of right now, they're relatively secure, fortunately. Yes, sir.
I just want to mention that we could have you back sometime to talk about the other snakes, because there's so many other ones.
I can talk about snakes all day long. Name it and I'll talk about it for sure.
Just even when I'm thinking that, right in your own backyard at old school Peggy Notabart for Northern Illinois Project University for green snakes is right there. There's green snakes being introduced for the last few years. And my thing and concern is you walk along with the little red-bellied snake.
Mhm.
They look like worms.
Yeah.
And they go across the trail. They don't see bikes and everything.
Yeah.
If you pick one up and just move it over.
To your point, the smooth green snake, that's a species of special concern in Illinois. I mean, their habitat is dwindling so rapidly. They are egg layers. They're the smallest egg layer snake in this part of the state. So the eggs are super tiny, and with climate change and and how hot and dry it tends to get, a lot of these eggs are desiccating. So they're just the snakes lay them in moist places, like underneath, leaves and piles of mulch and things like that. But it's just getting hotter and hotter and drier and drier. So the eggs are struggling to survive. And of course, the snake is an insectivore. So people are using a lot of insecticides. And, there's this, the idea that, with the loss of insects, there's loss of food. That's a whole other discussion. But I think that this presentation or the story on the Massasauga can very well apply to the smooth green snake at some point, because we're seeing those guys drop like flies too, unfortunately.
Well, thank you so much.
Thank you.
I think we can stick around for about 20 minutes, right?
Sure, yeah.
And so we have this room till 8:30, but I have to warn you again, at 8:30, we have to be out of here because